Greetings, it's Pastor Sara. I'm back for our Bible session number 3, and I'm recording this one in regards to what is the Bible. Remember, we talked about the Old Testament and then the New Testament, and now today we're going to talk about how the Bible has been used as a weapon. All right, so you don't have to look very far in Scripture to see how the Bible, the words in the Bible, have been used to wage war, to prevent women from serving in leadership roles in the church and in the world, and to divide God's people because of who they love. The Bible was written to preserve a way of life and reinterpret, reimagine God's people and this relationship that God has with people after the Babylonian exile. Had it not been for this Babylonian exile, for this event that happened where families were divided and forced to leave their lands in ancient times, I don't know if the books of the Bible would have been written. The Old Testament might not have been created. Yet these stories have been used to harm when they were really meant to help recreate this relationship we have with God. And they've been used to reimagine how God is involved in our lives through generations. And the words have been used to differentiate and make some people as less than. With a Bible in hand, the US government and Christians ripped Native American children from their families, stripped them of their heritage, and their point was to give them religion, kill the Indian, save the man. The books of Isaiah, Matthew, Mark, and Luke all talk about bringing the gospel to the world. But this message has been used not only to convert people, but to take away their language, their land, their traditions, and their resources. The Bishop of Rome invented the doctrine of discovery in 1493 to allow the church to take over lands in the name of saying, we're going to save the heathens. But the main purpose was to create an empire at the expense of the indigenous people who were there. For generations, the Protestant faith has used the same document to maintain power. And in my own Lutheran denomination, the ELCA did not repudiate this document until 2016. Apartheid, slavery, they've been other ways that the Bible has been used as a weapon to justify what people were doing to others. Genesis chapters 9 and 11 specifically were used to talk about the need for separation between people due to differences in color and status. Slave masters made sure to have preachers come by and remind their slaves of their duty to respect their masters, as it says in Ephesians 6:5 and Colossians 3:22. Patriarchy is another example of how the Bible has been used to harm. When you're reading Ephesians 5:22 to 24, ooh, my skin crawls, right? 1 Corinthians 14:34, 1 Timothy 2, Genesis 2, Isaiah 3 basically says women are to submit to men and take no power over men. And I wonder, why was that needed to be said so many times? Well, likely it was because women were in those roles and they were shown to be capable of serving and leading and making decisions. Somebody didn't like that. Homosexuality has been characterized also as sinful through their interpretation of Genesis 1 and 2, Genesis 19, Judges 19, Leviticus talks about it, 1 Corinthians, and 1 Timothy. In a Roman patriarch society in which many of the books of the Bible were written, families gave their male sons to a patron who was a mentor and was meant to teach them a trade. However, this practice was also traditionally full of sexual abuse and domination, and it was about a power and control relationship. And that is what the Apostle Paul is specifically speaking to when he talks about man should not lay with man. And now we interpret that very differently in our time and it has been at the expense of those that love people of the same sex. War continues now in Israel and the Middle East to gain power and control. You can hear that theme coming through with the abuse of the Bible, power and control. And they pin that on biblical references. The human experience and human need is not less important than Scripture. The Gospels, especially Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, does not endorse oppression. Marriage is to be viewed as a sacred vow because it represents a Christian partnership, not between two people, but between three. God is part of that bind. And God's love is not vindictive. It's not limited. It's not dependent on our actions. God does not work in and through the lives of just some. God works in and through the lives of all. God works in LGBTQ persons and indigenous people and non-Christians. Luke 15 talks about how we are to rejoice in this gift of love that God has given to all people. Using the Bible to classify, to differentiate, to marginalize another, or rationalize some destruction of resources is using the Bible as if it were a weapon. We read the Bible to learn and grow. The meaning of our understanding is constantly transforming. That's why we keep reading this book again and again and again. That's why we keep talking about it. That's why theologians have existed from thousands of years. There are some very hard stories to read in the Bible. The Bible is often depicts God as harsh and murderous and abusive and punishing. There's plenty of examples of that. However, the Bible is to be read as a whole. It is to be read through the lens of the cross. And as we read these stories and laws and prophecies in the Old Testament and even in the New Testament, we must also keep in mind the birth and the life and the death and the resurrection of Jesus. God so loved the world, he gave his only son so that we may now live and live into eternity. The Bible is the living word because of Christ, who is constantly living in the people of the world and transforming our thoughts and our minds to see one another as God's children. God's story is our story. We are all imperfect people who God has mercy on, like Jonah and Ruth and the Israelites, and so many more that we can read about in that book. God is God, and we are not. We cannot explain how God acts or limit God's ability to work in the lives of creation. To take the law of God into one's own hand for correction or enforcement or reconciliation is not using the Bible as it was intended. That is making oneself God and throwing Jesus out with the bathwater. Next session, we will discuss the terms theology of glory, works righteousness, and cheap grace, which are also understandings of the biblical truth in ways that dismiss the lens of the cross of Christ's redemptive work in the church. So long for now. Take care. Keep reading.